All right, but it is our starting time, so let's go ahead and formally get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Hamilton Whittle. I work with the ILC as a math and physics tutor. I do hope everyone has been enjoying the conference so far. We did just have the keynote before this on active listening for anyone who attended that. I do hope you enjoyed it. But if this is your first session of the day, thank you for joining us. And we are going to be discussing, as I mentioned earlier on, note-taking. And I did kind of poll the audience a little bit before on what their kind of notions or impressions of what notes are, what they're meant to be. I had a few responses there, and anyone who wants to add anything as we go, feel free. But most of the comments I got were things like the way to keep track and look back at the things you learned. Notes are there to remind you of what you had heard in the past, help you look back and remember. And those are very important uses of notes. And that's kind of what I expected from that, from the responses to that question on what you might think notes are meant to be. What we are going to be discussing here today is just how much more beyond just that they are can be and what they effective notes are meant to be. So let's get started here. So as college students, I'm sure everyone here is well acquainted with the idea of taking notes, but it might not be always intuitive on how to take the best notes for yourself or how to use those notes as effectively as possible. This can be the difference between making the grades that you want versus having just a jumble of papers that you're sorting through the few days before the exam. I'm sure a lot of students here might have experienced that in the past. They just have a whole bunch of sheets of paper or a whole bunch of pages they're trying to flip through. Maybe they're not as organized as they possibly could be, haven't been keeping track of their notes as effectively as they could be or as efficiently. So those are the kind of things we want to be addressing here today. Additionally, proper note-taking extends not only to actually taking the notes in your lectures, but they can be useful for anytime you're doing like research projects, maybe you're writing a paper, and it can also just be useful for reading comprehension. So in this presentation, we're going to address several questions you might be having regarding note-taking and all the uses that we want to be using those notes for. We're going to start out by making sure we're just on the same page on what we want our notes to be, what they're meant to be, along with what utility our notes have. We'll be discussing some options that we have when it comes to how we take notes, like what methods we have available to us, which all come with their own various advantages and disadvantages. Then a bulk of this talk is going to be discussing how to take these effective notes, where the most effective ones are ones that we have kind of started to prepare before class a little bit. We have a good understanding of what to write down as we're listening during class and how to structure it with those methods we'll be discussing here today. And then finally, reviewing and revising our notes after class. All those comments we had about looking back in, on what we wrote down to remember it, that's where that utility of our notes comes from. So as for the purpose of our notes, something we want to go ahead and try to have a clear understanding of as we go through this presentation. As the comments we got in the chat kind of point to, we all probably have the general idea that notes are something that are the result of us taking in the information and writing it down or typing it if we're on a computer, so we have it for ourselves later when we're going back to review or trying to remember things. But that is actually only part of it. If it was only a matter of having something to look back to, just having our textbook would be enough, right? What we want to make sure of as a takeaway today is that we want our notes to be something that is condensing the information and done so in a way that is easy for us to digest when we go back to, and is also done in a personalized way. So 2 key points of our notes that we're going to be kind of hitting on a lot as we go through this presentation is condensing information and personalizing it. The reason we want to condense things is because when we're studying, having that large volume of information makes it that much more difficult to take it all in, right? We don't want to go scouring the whole textbook anytime we're trying to refresh our memory on something. Additionally, just the act of trying to condense and personalize our notes goes beyond just creating a review material. By actively making decisions on what to write down and how to structure what we're writing, we think that much more critically about the material, as well as what's important. This is what ends up enhancing our own understanding of the material that much more as we're going through the process of making our notes. And I did mention this earlier, but if at any point anyone has any questions or comments they'd like to just mention as we go through the talk, feel free to just leave them in the chat. I have that popped up so I can see anything that comes in. And for those who do have their camera up, do know that this session is being recorded. So if you're fine with your self being shown on the recording, that's your choice, but just be aware that it is being recorded. All right, but now that we have a clear idea of what our notes are meant to be, that personalization and condensing information, let's also discuss how good note-taking can be useful beyond just classroom lectures. As we mentioned a little bit ago, whenever we are tasked with doing some kind of research project or writing a paper, it's our note-taking skills that enable us to keep track of that vast amount of information that we're going to have to be going through and juggling in order to prepare, pick out what's important, and additionally, we want to be keeping track of any sources as we go. So those are something that notes can help with. Then depending on what career field we might go into, these types of projects or papers might be something that we are expected to tackle. So even outside of the classroom, we could still be having these kind of assignments that are going to be important to have proper notes for. Additionally, in addition to those research projects and papers, some career paths might end up asking us to create presentations like the one being done today and all the other ones for our conference here today. Notes will once again be able to help us keep track of all the information that we're assembling to create those presentations. But even beyond school and career, notes can also help us in just our everyday lives. There are many times you might have to keep track of a lot of information while you're doing your own research for your own personal lives. Just some examples I came up with here are, first of all, let's say you're wanting to do some household repairs. So you have someone come and take a look at your thing, look at things, they run through your house and just do all the testing or whatever they have to look at. And what you're going to want to be doing when they come back to you is take note of whatever they say needs work, what they recommend to have that work done, whatever prices they might quote you, and so on. Then after that person that came in leaves, maybe you want to try going out and looking into things on your own, see if you can find some better deals, see how important the things they told you actually are. So you're going to be juggling a lot of information there that's coming from a whole lot of different sources, like the person that came, maybe you get in contact with some friends you know, and whatever other online sites or people you try to get in contact with provide you. So once again, our note-taking skills are going to be put to the test there. One other example might be maybe you're just shopping around for something, like maybe it's you're shopping around for health insurance. You're going to want to keep track of what companies cover what and how much it all will get charged for from each company. So as we can see, cultivating our note-taking skills in school can also end up being beneficial to us throughout various points in our life as well. So as we've mentioned a few times now, notes are our way of keeping track of a whole lot of information. So it's important that we keep our notes organized so that when we go back and try to find certain information, it's that much easier to find as well as comprehend it. This is going to be especially important in our classes, which go for several months and have that semester's worth of information to keep organized. One quick way to help us keep our notes organized is to write the date at the top of each class session's notes, along with some kind of title, whenever it's applicable, to have some kind of title or header that leads to whatever topic you're talking about in that class. Now, it doesn't always end up being the case that everything in one class session relates to just one topic, but we can still use these topic headers and subheadings to try to keep that information organized and just have a nice, easy kind of bookmark there for us to look at and say, okay, this section is related to this topic, or this section is related to this topic. We also want to keep all the information from each individual class in the same location, so it's all there in one place. Some options we have for physical notes, if you want to take physical notes, is you can use separate notebooks or folders for each class. You would want to ideally label these folders or notebooks or whatever you're using to help you quickly distinguish between them and make sure if you're putting something new in there, you're not getting it mixed up with another class. Meanwhile, for digital notes, if you use those, you're going to probably want to create a designated school folder in a place that you know where to access it. And then within that folder, you can have subfolders that are for each class. That's where you can store any notes or any assignments for that particular classroom, that course rather. If you do use digital notes, just be sure to use clear file names, ones that you can look at and easily identify like what they are, what is actually contained within them, and also make the file names ones that are easily searchable. So if you're looking for something, you can just go to your taskbar or wherever your search bar is for your operating system and just start typing in the beginning of the file name, and it'll come up right away. That can be a good convenience for digital notes. Finally, when you're doing things like research projects or papers which require sources of information, make sure to create a folder on your computer if you're going through online sources, where you save any online sources that you might use as some kind of bookmark. And additionally, whether you're using digital or physical notes, do make sure to keep track of whatever source each piece of information came from. You can even make notes on your notes, whatever page or whatever paragraph from that individual source that bit of information came from, if you ever want to go back and find it again. So that can make things a little bit quicker. All right, so now let's discuss some options we have when it comes to taking our notes. First of all, we would want to decide whether we are going to take physical handwritten notes on like our pieces of paper or notebooks, or are we going to take them digitally, like on our laptops or our tablets? For starters, let's go through some benefits of handwriting our notes physically. There have been research studies that show that handwriting our notes can just lead to a deeper understanding of the material, as well as make it easier to recall. This is something that I personally always found true for myself whenever it came time for review. I found the act of just writing something down made it easier to remember. So even when it got to the test time and I didn't have my notes in front of me, the fact that I had written something down, maybe even multiple times, made that easier to remember when I didn't have those notes available. Now that can vary from person to person, of course, but another benefit to handwriting is it's easier to create any personalized visuals or diagrams. That can be something that kind of takes a lot longer or requires certain knowledge of how programs work if you're taking digital notes. And even then, it might not be something that looks exactly how you kind of envision it in your head. So even if you're not maybe the greatest, you don't even need to be really an artist to kind of organize things visually for creating diagrams. But you can at least create them more easily how you vision them on a piece of paper. Additionally, physical notes can make it easier to focus on the material itself, both while making the notes and while going back and reviewing them. A lot of us these days are very prone to digital distractions, so cutting that out as much as possible can end up helping us focus. All right, so that's some benefits to physical notes. Now let's discuss some benefits to digital notes. If we end up taking our notes like by typing them, digital notes can be much quicker to type large volumes of information compared to just writing it down. And this can be most helpful in classes where they are very detail-oriented classes, like a history class, for example, where you have a whole lot of more long-winded text you might have to be typing or writing down. A huge benefit of digital note-taking is also that it makes revisiting and editing our notes incredibly easy while still keeping them organized. Compare this to physical notes, which you either have to leave room for revision when you're making them, like leaving some blank lines here and there, or if you end up wanting to completely restructure your notes, like create a new version, basically, that can end up being a little bit harder to keep track of because now you have a separate piece of paper or a separate page in your notebook that is kind of out of place. That makes it harder to stay organized in that regard. You might have to like rip out that piece of paper and kind of put it back where it's meant to go in your notebook. And then you have loose papers kind of sitting around. So again, not as convenient sometimes. Meanwhile, for digital notes, there's also the convenience of having multiple ways to access and share your notes across various devices. Compared to physical notes, where you either have your notebook or you don't, if you have your notes on a tablet or your laptop, that file can be saved and synced across all your devices. You could even end up pulling up on your phone, which you likely always have with you these days. If you're a visual learner, do you recommend one over the other? Again, it kind of just comes down to preference. If you are a visual learner, I do think that benefit of being able to create more custom diagrams more easily in physical notes could be beneficial. But it does kind of just vary from person to person. Whether you take handwritten or digital, whatever you find works best for you is what I was going to end up hitting on more than anything here. Let's see, what about using both ways at the same time? Yeah, that's absolutely an option. That does end up being, I don't want to rule that out. That is something that you have to just keep track of when it comes to organization. You now have both physical and digital to keep track of. There are some various ways you could approach that. You could write your notes physically if you wanted to, and then scan them into your computer, possibly. And then if you do need to go back and edit something, you can either like kind of cut and paste certain sections of that digitally. You can get very creative with this. I'm glad someone mentioned that so we could kind of discuss the possibilities there. So yeah, I don't really have much else. You can just get creative as you want with that, but you do want to make sure that you try to keep as organized as possible, is what I'll go back to there. Yeah, I'm glad that seems like a good idea for anyone who might like scanning the physical notes, so you can have those. Then one last benefit to digital notes that I will go ahead and mention is that modern technology has made it much easier to actually go and write on your screen, like if you have a tablet or something, or even like a two-in-one laptop or something. So you could get a lot of the benefits that you could get from your physical notes, but now they're automatically saved digitally. So depending on what technology you have access to, that is an option we now have these days. So I just mentioned this a moment ago, but while it is good to be aware of the pros and cons of both styles, it just does come down to your own preference, what you find works best for you. Neither is right or wrong. So, um, and like we just mentioned, if you do want to end up doing a bit of both, kind of make a hybrid for yourself, by all means, if you find that is what the style works best for you. All right, yeah, so thank you for those comments. I'm glad we could address some of that. So now let's talk about what you can do before class to enhance the notes that you'll actually be taking during it. Many of us probably don't really consider doing this kind of preparation for our notes before a class session, but taking just 10 to 15 minutes can end up priming us to take much better notes, as well as be more receptive to the material when we're hearing it in the class. The first thing we can do is take a look at just the syllabus or the schedule to find out what topics to be expecting that will be covered in our next class session. We do want to take just a moment as we look at those topics to determine if they're new or ones that connect to the material we've already covered in the past. If it is a topic that is related to previous material, we would want to go and just take a moment to make sure we're confident in that material. So when it comes up again, we're not kind of behind with that material that's kind of already being expected to be known. And it will also let us more easily see the connections that it has with the new material. Another preparation step we can take is to open up our textbook or whatever learning material we have available to us and just read through the introductory paragraph for the new material. Just that introduction. We don't really need to go that much further because what that introductory paragraph, what the purpose of that usually is just usually to give us an idea of what that material involves. Like why is it being discussed? What might be important to listen to for the during the lecture itself? What kind of keywords should we be looking for? And on the subject of keywords, one more thing we could do while we have that textbook open is just to kind of scan the chapter, whatever the section is, for any keywords that look important, like vocabulary, um, any equations, if we're in a class that has formulas or equations. We don't really need to worry too much about understanding all of those keywords or equations just yet. We just want to kind of be aware of them. They're going to be things to look out for during class. As we're doing the skimming, again, we don't really need to be reading the whole chapter if it's not an assignment. But as we're skimming, we can just look for like bolded words, things that are in boxes like vocabulary or equations, and stuff like that. And then finally, we just want to make sure that we're prepared to take notes. We want to give some consideration on what method we're going to be using that kind of fits the upcoming material the best. We will be discussing what methods we have available to us for making our notes shortly. But the important thing is that we're going to want to be using a method that works for us, that kind of if we're visual learners, if we're more detail oriented, whatever material we are going to be discussing, we just want to make sure that we choose one that works for us and the material. All right, so after some preparation, it's time for class. We want to be sure to come to class on time with a positive learning mindset and make sure we have our notebook or our tablet or laptop or whatever we're going to be using with us. As we're listening to our instructor and getting ready to take notes, we want to prioritize focusing on the material that the instructor is discussing. We don't want to just be kind of an empty receptacle that writes down the words we hear without thinking about them. So in order to properly focus on that material, while we're also worrying about trying to write things down, we should probably avoid doing more complicated things like any kind of personalizations like color coding, highlighting, and those types of things that kind of take up a lot of our attention or our brain space to worry about how to do that. That can be a distraction from the material. So that's just something we're probably going to want to save till after class while we focus on the material during it. Then, as we have already mentioned, we do want to make sure that we are taking notes in a way that we are comfortable with, but will also be structured when we go to review them later. Writing down everything we hear can be something that just jumbles up all the visual information in our notes. Like it just becomes a wall of text and it can be hard to parse. You may as well just read the textbook if you're just going to be looking at a wall of text, right? So we do want that structure there that kind of highlights the important bits and breaks down the details in a more easy to digest way. This is where the methods of note-taking that we're going to be discussing shortly come in. I see a comment here. In terms of highlighting the books during class, do you recommend that or save that for after class? I do not recommend trying to highlight either in your notes or your book during class. We want to be focusing on taking in the material, focusing on what's important, and writing that down in our notes. So trying to highlight rather than take active notes is going to be a more passive form of note taking. We want to be active when it comes to our notes. Like we actually want to be registering the material, processing it, and then regurgitating it in our own personalized way. That'll be something. Yeah, not multitasking is a good way to put it. So yeah, thank you for like what I'm doing right now as you're speaking. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So yeah, we're going to be discussing some methods we have to structure our notes, but additionally, if we are taking physical notes, something we want to be doing is trying to leave room for revision. This can be true for any note-taking method we're going to be discussing later, but it can be something like leaving a few lines between subtopics so you have that space to kind of put extra material that maybe you misunderstood something or didn't completely comprehend something in the class. So you have that room to go back later. Or if you want to maybe double space your notes in a certain way, like you could leave lines between each individual detail. So maybe that could also be a option if you're not worried too much about fitting everything onto like one page. If you're fine having that kind of spaced out notes, that can be an option. The margins on a piece of paper, like the left margin or even the right margin, if you leave that available, are options you have when it comes to revisions. Just you can fit in some extra details into those. That said, it can become very cluttered if you end up relying on those margins when you go back and do revisions to your notes, which can make your notes end up looking all that more kind of jumbled or tightly packed. So now that we're in class and all set to start writing our notes, what all should we write down and how much? Well, let's remember that the point of our notes is to condense down the information. So we don't want to try to write down every word that the teacher or the textbook says. That could very easily lead to very jumbled or very cluttered notes that become less useful when we're reviewing because of just how much superfluous detail there is. Trying to write down every word is also going to just end up distracting us from trying to actually think critically about the material, which is something we just mentioned that we want to be doing as we listen to the instructor or listen to the videos or read through the book. So we don't want to write too much, but on the other hand, we also want to make sure that we have enough detail there so that when we go back and look over our notes, they're clear and we don't have any important information that's missing. So to cut things down, we often don't need to write in complete sentences. Writing down in your own words is also something that can help with this, but also we want to encourage writing things down in your own notes because that's going to be beneficial to your own understanding of the material. You're taking that time to think critically about the information that's coming into your that you're listening to. Take that moment to, okay, what does that actually mean? How can I phrase it in a way that is good for me to understand? And then write it down kind of in a shorthand way in your notes. The only times we would want to write like the exact wording that the either the textbook or the instructor is providing is when that wording is important, such as in quotes or in certain definitions, perhaps. But even then, if it is a definition that we have written down in the exact wording that we were provided, maybe we still want to, in the line below it, maybe in our revision phase after class, go back and rephrase that definition in our own words. Additionally, to kind of cut down on how much time and words we'll be writing, we can make use of some shorthands or abbreviations to cut down on things. Although it is very important that any shorthand we use is something that we will know the meaning of whenever we go back and look at our notes. If there's something that is an abbreviation or a symbol that you use in your notes that when you go back and look at it, you don't know what it is, that's going to be a problem for understanding your notes, right? So we do want to make sure that anything we do use is something that we will know upon revisiting. I do have some just common shorthand on the right-hand side of this slide here. So you can shorten some words, like info is obviously information. If you're in a class that deals with like a lot of government stuff, GOV, government. Something I always use in my my math and science classes, EX for an example. You have other shorthands you can use, as well as some symbols. You can use the ampersand or the plus symbol for just writing the word and, although it does depend on the class itself and the context. For example, you wouldn't want to use the plus sign for and in a math class. That can cause a whole bunch of confusion there. The pound symbol for number, you can use some arrows in various ways, like an up arrow for some in the place of writing the word increase, the down arrow for the word decrease, just an arrow pointing to the right for something that like is like this leads to this causes this, or something along those lines. I see a comment there. When following along with the textbook, writing page numbers in the margin as a reference after class can be helpful. Yep, absolutely. That's a good use of margins there, and a way to kind of keep track of something if you need to go back and get that more detailed textbook explanation of something. Let's see. So we just went through the options we have for some shorthands and symbols. But in addition to this, we can use like initials for various things, especially if they're going to be very long phrases or repeated phrases that come up a lot in the class. Some of these are common enough that your teacher might end up just saying, hey, we often use this for the initials or abbreviation of this topic. But if you do end up making your own, again, we just want to make sure that whenever we go back and look at our notes, we know what those letters mean, whatever those initials are. So one possibility that you could do is like in your front of your notebook or some kind of like index or table of contents of your wherever you're making your notes. You could just have like a little summary of your any of these shorthands or initials that you make for yourself. So if you look through your notes and say, oh, wait, what were these initials again? You can just turn to that page and say, oh, okay. For example, in physics, we often use hear this phrase a whole lot called free body diagrams. So a very common initial we use for that is just FBD. So anytime a physics student was going in their notes and looking at, okay, draw the FBD. Wait, what did FBD mean? Let me turn to that page. Oh, free body diagram. So you do want to, anytime you do make these shorthands for yourself, just make sure you have, if they're not obvious to you, you have that resource to go back to and look them up in a sense. So all of this here serves to cut down on our writing time so we can put more of our attention into like that active listening of the material itself and comprehending it and thinking about, okay, I'm taking in this information, let me process it and pick out what's important for me to write down. So cutting things down is all well and good, but how do we make sure that we are getting all the important information that we need written down in our notes? Now, while this can be a little bit trickier, tempting us back to trying to write down as much as we can, there are some things we can be on the lookout for. For starters, if we did our pre-class preparations, we're that much more primed to know what to be on the lookout for. What are the important topics and keywords that once we hear them, we should start writing them down. Once we've done that preparation, if we've done that preparation, we can be on that lookout to listen for those words. From there or beyond that, even if we didn't do some preparation, we could listen out for new or repeated words or phrases, as well as any synonyms which the instructor might be using. Like anytime you hear a similar word over and over, maybe that's a signal that the teacher is trying to express something that's important in as many ways as possible to see what clicks. There are also various signal phrases, as we call them, that your instructor might be using to prepare us for an important detail that's about to come. These signal phrases can be something like, there are three main ... or the major reason for this is ... And more likely than not, anything that the instructor is taking the time to write on the board is also going to be something that's likely important to write in your notes as well. For the sake of time, I think I'll just skip a slide here. I will probably go ahead and provide this presentation, the PowerPoint file, in the chat at the end of the session, in case anyone wants to go back to it, especially when we get to the actual methods. How those are kind of structured in the slides to come will probably be beneficial to kind of go back to. So a lot of the recommendations we've gone through so far, I have kind of discussed from the lens of a kind of live in-person classroom setting, but it still applies to online learning or like if you're watching videos of some sort. I would like to take this opportunity to mention some other things that we could possibly do or be aware of when it comes to these more online materials. For students who just think that the purpose of notes is just to have that material to look at later, without really thinking about trying to like personalize things and put things into their own words, they might be under the assumption that printing off or saving the instructor's PowerPoint, if there is one, might be sufficient for their notes. But this is another thing that is just not active note-taking, which means you aren't really absorbing that information as effectively. Like you can look back at those PowerPoint slides anytime you need to, but you're not really taking in the information by just having those there for you. We aren't internalizing it is another way I might phrase it. Remember, we want our notes to be in our own words so that we have taken in that information and thought critically about it, and it makes more sense to us. That being said, you could print off the PowerPoint slides on like one half of a sheet of paper, and then on the other half of the page, write down your notes that you would take like during your class or whatever online lectures you're sitting through. That is a perfectly valid strategy because you're still taking that process to write down your notes, condense them, personalize them, but you also have those PowerPoint slides on the same page. So if there is anything important that you missed in writing your notes, those are there that you can refer back to. And then when you go back and do your revision, then you can put it in your own words. On another note, if you are watching some kind of like video lecture or a form of video that is going over the material, do try to watch it in real time if it's possible, just like you would in a class with as little pausing and rewinding as possible while you're going to go through and take your notes. Now, this might sound like, well, not obvious to a lot of students because, yeah, like this one, like you could go back and watch this after the fact and try to pause things and write things down so you have more time to write it down. But, and while that might seem beneficial to have that time available, trying to at least the first time watch it in that real-time setting is going to help you try to focus on that material and pick out what's important, just like you would in an actual live class session. But then you do have that benefit of if there was something that you need more clarification on, you can go back and fill and pause and record as you need to and fill in those blanks. I see someone mentioned something you could do as part of a preparation, look at the PowerPoint slides before class, and then take note on the PowerPoint during class. Yeah, just kind of like we mentioned, if you can print it off on one side and then the other, or if you're doing it digitally, you have those that option of just doing it on the slides themselves. Let's see, another comment here. If your professor doesn't record, ask if they would. Most will say yes, and great to go back and rewatch. Yep, that is a possibility. Like even if it's a in-person class session, there have been a lot of students who just want to like bring kind of a tape recorder or some sort that they can go back to. So you still have that live in-person session that you can't pause or record, but you can go back and just like a video, you can rewind or pause something when you need to kind of flesh out your notes in a way. While just getting the PowerPoint slides from the professor is not all you should do, it is a good idea to do so. Oh yeah, and like absolutely, you still have those PowerPoint slides available to you. Like I'm not like I said earlier, it's a perfectly valid strategy to have those slides. You just want to make sure that you are still taking personalized notes in addition to them. All right, so we're getting a little short on time, but I do want to make sure we go through the various note-taking methods we have available to us. So just to kind of mention their names here, we have the ones that I'll be going through. There are 4 of them. There are more, but these are the ones I'll be focusing on. These are the outline method, as it's called, the chart or column method, the mapping method, and the Cornell method. So to jump right into it, the first method we're going to be discussing is the outline method, which is a very common and easy to grasp method. This is kind of the one a lot of students end up kind of just coming up with on their own without really being told about it. I feel like this is what I ended up doing on my own. And I felt like this was always the one that made that worked for me the most. But again, it just comes down to preference. As you might expect, you begin with a bullet for the main topic with no indents. So on the kind of right side here is kind of the layout. So you have your main topic, then below it you have a bullet point with an indent for your subtopic, and then any key points that you have that are related to your subtopic kind of go under that with another extra indent. Something I always did is for each key point, I would make another kind of style of bullet point. So you could kind of structure it like that. There is some kind of flexibility here. So something I did was I kind of alternated between styles of bullet points. Like my first one would be dots, and they'd all be lined up together. Then anything that were under those subtopics, I would have dashes for them so I could kind of distinguish them easier. And if I did end up having anything I needed to have a like extra indent for, I could switch back to a dot. So I could kind of have that kind of ladder effect going. Some other options you have to kind of customize these are, instead of just like universal bullet points like just dots or dashes, you could use like letters like A, B, C's, or numbers 1, 2, 3. I feel like the numbers would be most useful anytime you're going through or you're learning material that has some kind of breakdown into a set number of details or topics of it. Like the 3 main branches of government, like 1, 2, 3. So you can list those as numbered things. Or if it's a step-by-step process, here's step 1, here's step 2, and so on. There are some pros and cons to this. I might kind of rush through this for each method. The pros to the outline method, it's simple to approach. It does keep things organized in a very easy to digest way. It's best for courses with more details. Some cons to this, however, are that it's not really as beneficial for courses that frequently jump between topics or have just a whole bunch of kind of random details coming at you that aren't really related to one main topic. The bullets kind of become less useful in that regard, and you can't really, if you do end up jumping back and forth between topics, that can throw off the organization. Additionally, it's not really it doesn't end up being as friendly for revision unless you leave that space between details that you can go back and fill out anything that you need. So you do have to leave that space if you do want to do revision. Otherwise, it just becomes kind of more of a tightly packed, condensed form of notes that you can't really go back and fill things out on. The next method that we'll be discussing is the chart or column method. This is where you break up your page into columns, depending on how many topics you're going to be going through in a certain main topic. Example you might use this for are, again, like if you have that class where you're going through the branches of government, you might have your 3 columns be each branch of government, and then you can list the details that are associated with each branch just directly underneath those. This style of notes is going to be most useful when you have like a clear number of topics that you're going to be going through that are generally related to some main topic, and you could want to be like drawing comparisons between them. Ideally, just between like 2 and 4 topics that can break it up into these columns. Some pros of this is it's another way to keep our information organized by some form of topics or groups. Kind of the most beneficial part of this method is that it makes it easier to make comparisons between topics, because you can kind of look at each column and say, okay, this does this, this does this. And it can be very helpful if you keep your details kind of lined up together whenever it's applicable. It's also just a good method whenever you're trying to review a lot of facts generally. Some cons of this, however, are by dividing up your paper into those columns, it does kind of leave less space for details. So if you're in a class that has more like long, full sentence structured details, it can be hard to kind of fit it all in. It kind of gets more tightly packed. This method is one that's kind of hard to anticipate when a topic is really going to fit nicely into it. without doing some kind of like preparation, looking into, okay, how many topics am I going to be going over? Can I break it into these various topics? So it's not really recommended to be done during class because you have to be aware of it beforehand because of that. Meanwhile, we have the mapping method. This is what we would kind of recommend more for people who like visual learners or just students who like seeing kind of the connections that things can be making with each other. This is where you draw yourself some form of diagram, starting kind of branching out from a main topic into subtopics. And then those subtopics can have any details that you're needing to write down either underneath or around them. This is style of notes is kind of flexible with how you kind of structure your notes, whether you kind of go from top down, start at the main topic at the very top, and then branch downwards, center your topic in this middle of the page and can branch out from there. You could even start the main topic on the left side of your paper and kind of branch to the right, kind of like, and kind of make it almost like a timeline of sorts. If you're, if you feel like your class kind of feels natural to kind of break up into that kind of thing. But generally, this is kind of our visual diagram form of notes, which again is just very good for visual learners seeing how topics kind of connect back to a main topic. There is kind of that flexibility on how you map the information, what colors you use, what shapes you use, how you make connections, like different kinds of lines could mean different kinds of connections. So because of all that flexibility and customization you can put into it, it can end up being very good at remembering these kind of relationships between the topics. However, this is a very kind of involved method that is not really something you can know how to kind of structure it in your notes as you're going through the class itself. You don't really know how to expect your big picture to look. So it's best saved for after class rather than trying to think about everything lining up during the class. So take some form of notes and then do the kind of visual diagrams, the mapping method later. All right, so this will probably be the last big thing I really have time for, but I do want to make sure that I introduce this Cornell method for anyone who hasn't been made aware of it. I see a comment here in the chat real quick. Let me read that. Have you ever seen an application called Mind Manager? It is used a lot in making notes, taking and writing projects way easier, very much in the way you just presented. Okay, no, I was not aware of that. So if anyone does want to look into that, it sounds like Mind Manager is something that can help you create or structure those more visual diagram form of notes. All right, but for our last big thing that I do want to bring our attention to, that last method is the Cornell method, which was created at Cornell University in the 1950s. It's a way to kind of structure our notes that encourages that kind of post-class revision or review, where you kind of leave space for certain things. So we structure our notes, we kind of split up our page into 3 sections like you see on this diagram here. The right section of your notes, or the right side of your page, this is where you would take your notes normally, like however other method you would want to during your actual class. Meanwhile, you leave space on the left side here for what we call cues, which I'll get into in a moment. This will be something we do after class. And then at the very bottom, you leave room for a summary, which again is something we do after class. So the summary is fairly self-explanatory. You try to reword the main topics of the class in just like 2 or 3 sentences in your own words. But these cues, what do we mean by those? Well, it can be as simple as just kind of like a bookmark for yourself. Like you write what kind of the main point or main idea that is to the right of it in your class notes is. That's one option, just as kind of that bookmark. But the more advanced method of cues is writing actual like prompts for yourself, or review questions, or just something that kind of gets you to look at, once you look at it, it makes you think, okay, what do I remember about this? Or can I answer this quick question? So usually we want our cues to be kind of short and simple, but if you get into the habit of making them prompts or some form of short form questions, it also becomes not only a way to help you think more critically about the notes you have done, but also provides you a way to review. Something you can do is kind of cover up the right side of your notes and just look at those cues that are on the left side and kind of quiz yourself. Like, what do you remember? Can you answer the study questions that you've made? So the benefits of this are, like I just mentioned. Can you quickly talk about after close note taking? Yes, for anyone who is interested in sticking around maybe a few extra minutes, I'll get into what we can do after class. But if you do have to head to the next session of our conference, I do thank you for joining us here today. So I think I'll go ahead and let anyone who wants to kind of call this session done. I do hope this has helped. But again, I will, just for a few extra minutes here, try to take a little bit more time in discussing that after notes, or after class notes, that we would want to go through. Yeah, again, I will, after we wrap up, I'll provide the PowerPoint presentation in the chat here. So if you want to look back and look at how those Cornell notes are structured, that will be there for you. All right. So yeah, I'll kind of take my time here. I'll let anyone who wants to go. But the Cornell method, it does encourage you to put things into your own words with the cues and summaries, which is something that we want to be doing for our notes. It encourages this prompt after class review session of our notes. And as we just mentioned, it's good for self-testing. You could cover up the note section and just look at the cues and kind of quiz yourself. There's not really that many cons to using this Cornell method, other than it does kind of take some time adjusting to get the most out of it, like how to what you should be writing for your cues to be as beneficial as possible. All right, so those are the methods we have when it comes to making our notes during the class. So at this point, we've kind of discussed everything that there is to that I had to mention about what was possible during class. So let's talk about things we could be doing after class, because we're not done just making our notes during class. That doesn't effective notes are ones that we go back to shortly after class, ideally within the next day or two after making them, because studies show that we usually forget a lot of material just a day after hearing it. So we do want to revisit our notes very shortly after our class, and look back over them and review them. Additionally, we want to make regular time for our notes, looking over them from that point onwards, to avoid having to end up cramming the days before a test, because cramming is never an effective study method. This review of our notes can start out being as little as 10 to 15 minutes a day when we're still far away from the test. Then as we get closer to that test, we have more notes to keep track of and go through, we can start bumping up that time as we get closer. But when we do revisit those notes that first time after we make them, we do want to make sure everything in them is detailed and organized in a way that is clear to us. So going back, you want to make sure, do you understand all the shorthand and abbreviation you used? If not, it's time to correct that and maybe avoid using those shorthands in the future. We want to be double checking if there's any blanks or gaps in our notes on how we understood the material. This is another reason we want to revise very shortly after our class, since there may have been something in the middle of the class that we didn't quite grasp. But once we heard the whole class session and kind of had some time to let that kind of sit in our heads a little bit, maybe we can see that, maybe we see the bigger picture. And when we go back to our notes, we can say, oh, that's what they meant. Let me write that down. If we do end up needing to go out to an outside resource to fill in a gap in our knowledge or get some clarity on something, it's also best to do so while the information is fresh, before any more additional information piles up with future class sessions. We do recommend any resources that you have available to you to make use of. This can include office hours, your textbook, any online resources, and as an ILC, I definitely recommend tutoring. Feel free to make any tutoring sessions you need to kind of fill in those gaps. And finally, the last thing we can do when we're revisiting our notes is to personalize them in those ways we couldn't do it during class. So some very common ways we can personalize notes are color coding, highlighting, boxing in important information. You just want to make sure as you're going through and doing that, you're not just doing it haphazardly, like, oh, this word looks important, let me highlight it. You're actually kind of thinking about the material. Okay, here's a vocabulary word, here's a definition. Let me highlight that vocab word. That's important as I think about the definition. Additionally, this is when we could get into that creating new versions of notes if we want to, that we weren't able to do in class, like those more visual types of styles of notes, like the mapping method. This is where we can make our diagrams, make our tables, or if now that we have a bigger picture of, or a better understanding of the big picture, we can restructure our notes in a way that makes more sense to us. So we will go ahead and wrap up here. I do thank everyone who stayed a little bit long who were interested. Just as a final summary here, let's remember that our notes are meant to summarize and condense. They are meant to be personalized. The most effective notes are ones that we kind of prepare a little bit before class, are taken during class, and are utilized effectively after class. You want to make sure to just find a method that works best for you and personalize from there. And of course, we want to stay organized. All right, so I do want to thank everyone who joined us. And again, thanks to everyone who stayed a little bit afterwards, who were interested in getting that little bit of extra information. And I do hope you have a very enjoyable rest of the conference. And welcome to the new semester. I hope it goes well.